Welcome to the Future of Work podcast. I'm your host, Frank Cottle, and today we're going full throttle into 2025 with Ryan Anderson, Vice President of Global Research and Insights at MillerKnoll. Together, we'll explore how workplaces are evolving by blending technology, design, and community to create environments that equally support belonging and productivity. Ryan shares his unique perspective on how organizations can navigate distributed, hybrid, and globally connected worlds. But here's the question. In a time when technology keeps us more connected, yet increasingly isolated, how do we ensure the future of work brings us closer together? Let's find out. Ryan, welcome to the future of work. We're really excited to have you back again, my friend. And gosh, nobody knows more about what's going on than MillerKnoll. You guys do amazing studies. You see architecture of every sort. You see the way space is used probably better than anybody I know in the world. So I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to ask you a question as we start, and it's kind of goofy. But there's been a lot of property sold in Manhattan and London lately, of office buildings, and an awful lot of conversion to residential. So what if this? What if the cities? What if New York? I know this is crazy, but what if New York said there are no new building permits are going to be issued aside from mixed use,
Mm.
aside from a mix of residential and commercial together? How would that change the future of work? How would that change the way we work and 15-minute cities and all the concepts that if someone had the courage to do that?
Yeah, great question. And thank you for having me. It's great to see you, my friend. Uh, there's several things that come to my mind, but I think it could have immediately positive effects on the health of cities, particularly if those requirements for mixed use ensured that something other than luxury, extremely expensive condos were the housing solution.
Yeah.
I mean, I think of all of the ways that people used to live in cities. People used to live in hotels. That was like a normal way
Mhm.
of living. There were other sorts of housing arrangements. I'm thinking in this moment of Diane Lynn's book, Brave New Home. There are ideas floating around as an example of how you can take a more traditional office design with private offices around the perimeter of a, let's say, a class B or C building, and turn it into student housing or co-living for the elderly, where each of those offices become basically private rooms with shared amenities in the open. And those shared amenities might not be a copy center or a training room. They might be a kitchenette or a place to play board games. So what I,
Well, excuse me for interrupting, but wasn't that part of the concept, of WeWork's We Live co-living structure?
yeah, so I was at WeWork for a while, and yes, one of the concepts was we live in, and kind of an emphasis on what co-living could be. I don't think it's a well understood concept, but I do think that co-living in all of its forms, this could be retirement communities, college dormitories, etc., offer unique living opportunities and helps to address something that is affecting our lives and our work, which is just the high degree of social isolation and loneliness that exists um, across the world, but in particularly in the West. Our Surgeon General here in the US has declared an epidemic of social isolation and loneliness. So there's a practical side to what you're describing. It'll rejuvenate cities, it'll certainly help with the use of offices and other workplaces, but there's also a positive potential social dynamic if we were to head down this path. And certainly there is an environmental sustainability one too. It's not like we don't have enough buildings. The challenge is we have buildings that people don't want and other people.
Well, they only use them 8 hours a day or 10 hours a day.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
and that's the problem. It's maybe this is a horrible example, but it's a lot like church properties that are used on Sundays as a utilization of the asset and real estate. It should be used 24/7. Spiritually, it probably should, considering the state of the world. But um, uh, different types of properties have different efficiencies, and office buildings, for their stated purpose, are pretty good. They're a good place to work. They're very efficient, but only for um, a very limited amount of time during the day, a third of the day. And that means that you have a wasting asset the other two thirds.
Yeah, we've seen some really good examples though of people breaking that mold. I'm thinking as an example, there's a building that not a lot of people know about that I consider to be one of the most interesting progressive workplaces on the planet called the Ledger in Bentonville, Arkansas, which you could describe as a flex space. Yeah, have you?
I have been there. Yeah, I was there last year. I was there last
Isn't
year.
it fascinating?
An amazing fine art museum in Bentonville.
It's part
Uh,
art museum, it's part event space, it's co-working, it's there's not necessarily a residential component of it, but as an example of a space that was co-designed with the community in mind, I mean, you can even reserve time to go take pictures for Instagram there. It's that cool of space. And as you know, because Bentonville's the mountain biking capital of the US, it's also a bikeable building with switchbacks on the exterior to allow you to go right from the trails into the building. So all of this sort of experimentation around how do you get better use, multifunctional use, more flexible use, but also just a greater investment and kind of permission from the community, I think that's really powerful. We have very public and very private places, but there's a spectrum within them of privileged environments that I think more people want to be able to access.
well, the co-working industry, I'll use that term, has been stressing the concept of community since its development, since its initial development. Prior to that, it was business centers and things of that nature, which also had a sense of community. But co-working has really made that an element of it. It's one of the key purposes of the facility itself.
Mhm.
Is that function, or can you extend that function into a work live environment? I mean, work live. Cities had communal ovens even 200 years ago, even 100 years ago. Communal ovens, communal water, a whole variety of places where everybody went to do certain things within the community. Um, I know my wife and I used to windsurf down in Mexico a lot, and we stayed in a little village on the East Cape of Baja. Sailing was amazing, but it was about a 45-minute mountain bike ride to the next nearest village where the telephone was. Okay, and that one telephone operator, it was amazing. An old Mitel switch with runoff batteries. I mean, it was just an amazing thing. There would be a line of people going in there to use the different booths, and the operator would place calls. So this sounds really rustic, right? Everything. I swear, marriages were arranged there, families got together there, holidays were planned there. Everybody did everything about the phone.
Hmm.
They all went there to that one common place for that. As soon as mobiles came into the area, all the villages fragmented.
Mm-hmm.
They all fragmented. They all became isolated. And so, in the extreme, that's what you're talking about that has happened. We've all fragmented overall.
Yeah. With technology as the primary enabler of this concept of an atomized individual, if you look at the user interfaces of most of our software and the availability of all of these hardware devices, they promote, maybe inadvertently, but us doing most of the key activities we want to do by ourselves, physically removed from others, whether that's watching movies, streaming as opposed to being in a theater, or whether it's taking video calls individually versus being in a room. And so I don't ever want to appear to be a Luddite, but we have to recognize that the natural force of technology is to cause a degree of physical separation and to be optimized for individual use cases. So whereas that community building and that kind of communal experience you described in the past was a necessity, today it's a design challenge. Like we actually have to figure out what it looks like to enable people to really thrive in different community moments because it doesn't happen organically with the way that our behaviors are evolving.
No, I completely agree with that. How does that relate to relationship based work or things like place attachment? And by the way, technology, I was driving back from Dallas yesterday and I had an argument with Siri on directions, and she won. We had a full discussion about the route that she was
There
taking.
you go. Yeah, yeah, I get that, and I don't go anywhere without Waze, don't get me wrong. These tools are incredibly helpful from an efficiency standpoint. But as it pertains to this concept of relationship-based work or planning for relationship-based work, that's a framework that we've been talking about lately. It's a new construct, but it's just drawing on really good design principles, and it acknowledges that, in particular, when it comes to workplace, people are voicing a strong need to spend more quality time together, to balance the use of technology with interpersonal experiences and interactions that are very difficult to achieve on video or on chat, etc. And so when we look at the copious amounts of research that either we've done or our thought partners have done, we consistently see terms like community, camaraderie, in-person meetings, collaboration as the reasons that people cite for being together. But when you peel it back a little farther, it's just they want to have quality relationships and exist within a broader community at work, because that's what companies and organizations are. They're social networks, and you don't want everybody operating like freelancers. You want people to come together with some sort of shared sense of purpose. And so we can draw upon a variety of frameworks from the world of social sciences to help explain why certain types of workplace design are so much more appealing, so much more enticing to different people. And place attachment's one of them. I mean, there's a few that come to mind. I'll chat about place attachment just for a second, but I'm also thinking about psychological safety, the existence of strong and weak ties, bridging social capital. Like, there's all these frameworks that, if you take them and apply them specifically to workplaces, can lead you to really rich um, design solutions that maybe you wouldn't come to if we take a more traditional approach to workplace design around activities or tasks or the sort of things.
I got to jump in
Sure.
for a second. Um, on relationship-based work and everything you said about the quality of relationships, absolutely agree. But I'm going to use two phrases. Um, familiarity breeds contempt,
Okay.
and absence makes the heart grow fonder. So I'm going to use those two phrases and say relationships, and this deals with return to office versus hybrid versus remote versus all these different work styles that we're embracing right now. How do you balance out my two goofy phrases with return to office versus remote and hybrid? Where is this blend to where you can have the quality relation? The best conversations I have are with friends that I haven't seen for a while.
Hmm.
Then we really dig into stuff together.
Hmm.
The least interesting things I have are with people that I see all day long every day. And we might get together on a sidecar or on a thing, but we don't discuss interesting stuff in the office.
Oh,
We
okay.
discuss side of the office,
Yeah.
interesting stuff. How do you balance that in the work environment and the design environment, which you were talking about?
Yeah, I think it's with an intent to support both. So I mentioned the term strong and weak ties. That's a sociological framework from a guy named Granovetter. And basically, the idea is that those people that you see every day, those closest relationships are strong ties. That's our support structure for getting through the work week and just through life in general. All of our extended relationships, the people that we haven't seen for a while, the people that we might not actually know that well but recognize us, those weak ties, as sociologists call them, are actually our foundation for feeling secure and a sense of belonging and a sense of community. And so you can design a workplace that, yes, allows you to interact with the people closest to you on a daily basis to be able to get stuff done, but that is specifically designed to help you connect with people that you would have no reason to be on a Zoom call with. It could be members of different teams, it could be leaders in the organization that you don't report to, but by interacting with them, you find a much greater sense of security and understanding of what's going on at your place of work. When we get down to like really specific spaces, it could be everything from team neighborhoods to cafes to internal event spaces. There's still a need for areas to focus and concentrate, but the overriding theme here would be give people enough choice, like not an overwhelming amount of choice, but enough choice so that if they're fortunate to be on a more flexible work plan, that on a given day, they can make those transitions between I need 2 hours to concentrate on this spreadsheet, and then I'd really love to go be around a bunch of people I haven't seen for a while, to I really need to find my closest coworker to work through something. The challenge has come when we see much more prescriptive, either prescriptive space designs or prescriptive policies that say, be here on this day, do this. Here's, that's an old school view of how work gets done.
The problem starts with a policy. The solution comes from the design and the community.
Yeah, and policy at an enterprise level, like you can see meaningful change in how people work at a team level. Like a good team leader can say, "Hey, we're going to shift the way we do things. We're going to spend more quality time. We're going to use a different set of tools." But at an enterprise level, like trying to get hundreds or thousands of people to do something differently is almost impossible. And what happens is it becomes a free for all, which I think actually is the condition that most organizations that have adopted a hybrid policy are facing right now. It's that there's very little coordination. Everybody's trying to do their own thing. There's no sense of predictability that if you come into a workplace that you're going to see anybody you're hoping to see, and you don't want to go there just to sit on screens all day long, because you can do that more effectively in an environment that you control at home. And so some degree of coordination is really, really important. But yeah, ideally, people feel like the workplace is where they can get quality interactions with team members that would be very difficult to have on video, and interactions with people that they just don't have any reason to be in touch with digitally.
Well, it's funny. We're going through some change right now in the workplace, brought on by technology, changes in society, pandemic, and I will make a statement. People may disagree with me that every revolution in throughout history has started with people seeking freedom and autonomy, and I can't think of one that hasn't.
Hmm.
They wanted freedom from something, or change from something, or autonomy from something. And in the workplace, which is really we're talking about now, it can become very US centric very quickly. We're using Manhattan as an example, and different examples and stuff. But it's really the workplace is a global issue today. We hire across borders as a company all the time. And that means we hire into and out of other cultures, and different cultures have different ways of dealing with loneliness, of dealing with prescriptive policies, all of these things. How do you blend that together for companies that cross borders? How do I manage that effectively? This is going to become a really loaded question. This can become a freight train
No,
here
it's a
for
really good
in a s-
question.
because the everything you've been talking about so far says, yeah, it sounds like a Microsoft campus. Oh yeah, I said, but Cisco would be worried about that. Oh, maybe JP Morgan's thinking that. Bullshit. 80% of the people in the United States work for small businesses. How do you apply these things to those companies, not just to the people building the ideally designed campus that's going to have relationship based work and a strong sense of place attachment?
Yeah. Um,
There's the challenge. This is a universal human challenge, not just a Fortune 500 challenge.
no, I agree, and it's not just a business challenge. I mean, I would extend it into the realm of nonprofits and schools and healthcare facilities. So I'm very fortunate to have a team of about 30 that's all over the world. We have many team members in Europe. We've got a team member in Bangalore, and I think actually a lot of the principles do transcend not just large enterprises with these big campuses. And in some cases, it's a little bit easier. So I'll give you an example. If it were a smaller group of employees in a location that values that social connectivity, so just like, well, let's take India as an example. I don't know that there's going to be quite the struggle of a really large distributed organization trying to set up an office in Atlanta. But I'll come back to the term I just used is probably a really good place to start. For all the headlines around hybrid, remote, et cetera, just recognizing that most organizations, small or large, are becoming more distributed. Like they're just spreading out. And it could be
Yeah.
that everybody's in an office, but they're now in 6 offices instead of 1 office. It's rare to find organizations that train their team leaders to effectively manage a distributed team. Part of that process is understanding the cultural nuances of where your team members are and what they might be facing on days when they're at home or in the office. When it comes to the design of workplace, each of those spaces in different parts of the world needs to be well tailored for the expectations and needs of the group that are in that location. And that's also a chance for other team members from around the world to experience the culture and life in the office in those distinct locations. My team's been we travel a lot. We've been in well over 100 markets this last year. I just got done
Mhm.
with a series of site visits in Australia, but my one of my team members, Mark, just got back from a week and a half touring sites in across India, and we love to talk about these differences. It's not an era where we can impose thinking from one geography on another, and we always have to be really careful, and I say this in a somewhat guarded way. When we work with organizational leaders that might be writing the check for a new facility, in the back of our mind, we have to recognize that they may or may not know anything about how their team members work in different parts of the business or different locations. And so, where this is heading is a more localized and more participative approach to designing these sort of spaces to make sure that it actually works for the people who use them on a given day.
I think that that's critically important. And the we had another company. It was a network company of members all over the world,
Mhm.
and we used to say back in the '90s, early '90s, that our differences was our strength.
Hmm.
That what we learned in Japan as a business concept, once we figured out how to translate it, let's say, and reapply it to the entire group, became breakthrough.
Mhm.
And then we learned something in India, or we would learn something in Germany, and we had to translate it and make sure it crossed the borders effectively, so to speak. But we've always felt, and I still do today, that those differences of what you learn and how you learn are critical. And we used to time things too with what we call a pebble in a pond. Okay, so a pond has a certain shape, and you drop a pebble somewhere in it. Well, the wave pattern that comes out, it might hit a cliff on one side that's very close, and it might have to go all the way across the pond past the ducks to the shallow water and has a different pattern there. But you always have an idea that drops somewhere and then it distributes itself.
Hmm.
And those differences that you're talking about in cultures really become a strength. That is how we grow and how we learn. Think of how we learned language. Think of how we learned mathematics. Think of how we learned, everything. It's really through cross-cultural exchange and trade.
Mhm.
That was the way we learned as a race, going back through history. And I don't think it's any different today. We just cross borders faster, and we use different vehicles. We use technology instead of camels and horses, and but we're still exchanging, and that is a huge element. And it kind of takes you to, I guess, within an organization, how do you create a social obligation between the team members so that they're obligated to each other, and that becomes their strength, is their moral code, if you will, to support one another
Yeah.
in a diversified world, in a distributed organization. How do you do
I
that?
mean, I think it goes back to what we had briefly touched on before, which is you have to kind of assess whether or not the way work is organized is creating a sense that everyone's a freelancer doing their own thing, or they're actually part of some sort of cohesive team or community that's trying to achieve together. Um, we had Tim Arnsbach, who's the head of workplace innovation at the Lego Group, as one of our guests on our podcast about place this season, talking about how they approached hybrid. And this is a distinctly, I think, Scandinavian approach, but they called it best of both. And instead of having any sort of communication around what the leaders think employees should do or where they think they should be or concerns about productivity, they framed it as there's a balance here. More location flexibility gives you more options for work-life balance, but all of the employees do have an obligation to each other, a social responsibility to each other. You need to be present for your team members. You need to build into your team members. You need to help new people to gain a broader network and understand how things are done. You need to be able to reach out to other teams to make sure you're all working effectively. And that requires, in many cases, being together in meaningful ways. And so I don't think that that approach only works in places like Denmark. I think it's reframing the conversation to put more trust and responsibility in employees. And if I look at office design and workplace design in particular, the roots of offices didn't exactly speak employee trust. They were basically spaces to supervise work and express the status of leaders.
Wardens with billy clubs
Yeah,
walking up
in some
the road.
cases, I've been in spaces that have still felt like that, and so this idea that you were talking about with the pond, suggests that someone in leadership is actually viewing either how they organize work or how they organize workspace as a journey where you can learn from it and iterate on it and cross-pollinate ideas from one place to another, which why wouldn't organizations do that? They invest so much in corporate real estate. It's usually, number 2 or number 3 in terms of investments that they're
Yeah.
making, but they just view it as a necessary evil, working with old assumptions. But this approach that says the spaces that we give you, just like the technology tools we give you, are tools for you to achieve together, and let's figure out what it looks like for you to really use them effectively, that's the better conversation.
Well, when you say that, and let translate that a little bit, hybrid.
Mhm.
I'm going to work remotely from home. I'm going to work from a third workplace, hopefully a co-working or a business center, and then I'm going to work from the corporate office. I am a local nomad.
Mhm.
Uh, I'm not a digital nomad. I don't have my laptop and my guitar, and I'm not living in Bali doing gig work. I'm not a slow mad that moves from Barcelona one season and then Berlin the next season and then maybe Mexico City the next season. I'm a nomad. I'm a local nomad, and I think we all are that. We are all travelers today. None of us are permanent anymore. We are all travelers. The only permanence is that we've got technology attached to us somehow overall. But when in that environment, and from your business in particular, you have a unique insight on this, being in the furnishings business. How do we support the health and well-being ergonomically
Mm.
across that local nomad structure so that we're protecting the health and well-being of our employees the same way we would hope that people are doing within a permanent office?
Yeah, that's a that's a great question. I'm gonna broaden your question even a little bit, and then I'm gonna get specific.
Oh,
So
no, don't do that. It scares people.
So, as you know, MillerKnoll is a collective of about 16 brands, and that includes Herman Miller and Knoll, but also manufacturers that specifically are designing for residences. And we cover a lot of different types of space. Like my
Mhm.
my team researches not just offices, but homes, schools, hospitals, and beyond. And it gives us a chance to learn and cross pollinate what we see in some environments to others. And there's actually quite a bit of interesting cross pollination happening. You mentioned co-working and its focus on community. That would be one of many examples. It starts for us with trying to understand comfort. So I'll get to ergonomics as a more specific facet of that in a minute.
Well, no, I'm really talking about health and well-being as it relates to
Yeah.
ergonomics and
Well,
the responsibility of an employer if they're gonna say, "Yeah, work from home,"
yeah, I'm going to go
to
there.
make
I promise.
work from home as protected as work from the office.
Yeah. Well, again, if we understand that comfort is not just physical, but it's also social, and there's cognitive, mental comfort, et cetera, there's reasons why we gravitate towards certain places. Like maybe I'd like to do email from a coffee shop for an hour, or maybe I'd like to go sit on my living room floor and try to deal with a spreadsheet. And it often has less to do with physical comfort because those places are often not providing good ergonomics and they can produce all sorts of negative physical ergonomics, but they provide a degree of emotional comfort in other ways that we have to understand, and we have to make sure that workplaces do a better job of supporting that. I do think we're in a situation right now where physical ergonomics is being neglected, and employers are not paying near enough attention to it. We've had about 34,000 people use Herman Miller's work from home tool. Right around 60% say they're experiencing physical discomfort throughout the workday. The majority of the things they cite are shoulder, neck, back pain associated with kind of just sitting in crappy chairs or chairs that don't support them for doing computer-based work. And so I think, yes, employers can provide offices that don't just provide good ergonomics at a desk, but think through all the other places like a cafe or a project room where somebody might choose to do work. The really progressive ones will also try to make sure that they're ergonomically supported at home. If you look at Aeron chairs as an example, I mean, we sell a whole lot of them either to consumers or to organizations for people to use, not just in the office, but home. Um, yeah.
My wife has an Aeron chair in her office
Tell her
upstairs.
thank you. We appreciate the
Yeah,
business.
I'm sitting in a 1988 ECLA.
I know. It's still a great chair.
And I've never been able to wear it out. So I don't want to pitch your product, damn it.
Oh, please do.
No, we're going too far there. But the ergonomics of work have a lot to do with the comfort and productivity and the exhaustion rate or lack thereof
Mhm.
of comfortable for people, and that has a lot to do with productivity. So it is important that we understand how that pushes out to the thing.
Yeah.
So finish with that, and then I want to take it down another
Well,
course
I'll
here.
just add on the roots of ergonomics were around basically finding ways in manufacturing and other environments to accomplish tasks more quickly. It wasn't really about comfort as much as it was eliminating barriers to productivity. But when well, and I don't want to do a product pitch either, but there was a guy named Bill Stumpf who created the first ergonomic chair, Ergon, for Herman Miller in the 70s. And he liked to quote this philosopher named William Gass, who said, "Comfort is the absence of awareness," meaning like if you have that little tag on your shirt and it's bothering you, you can't focus on anything else. But if it doesn't exist, you experience comfort and you don't know it. That's kind of what we're trying to achieve in a good workplace design, whether that's home or office or beyond. Can people just feel free to get what they're trying to do done, to relate with people in a really natural way? Or is there something about the environment? Could be, a light bulb, could be some ambient noise, could be something about the way you're sitting or the desk that's just interfering with what that experience could be. The goal is to eliminate those types of interference.
Well, jump to the next type of environment overall. Where are we going to see more about augmented reality, holographic technologies, et cetera? Technologies that are going to continue to evolve that will change the way we immerse ourselves in the workplace. Um, uh, you know, I, go there a little bit
Sure.
because I think that when we're talking about the future of work,
Yeah.
and talk about the future of work, we have to consider this and how it all ties to artificial intelligence, which I actually think I'm probably goofy. I think artificial intelligence is not artificial at all. I consider it to be an entirely new species,
Hmm.
or different species at least, because we've had computers around for a long time, just advanced computers. So how is design shift? How's the future work going to embrace these new technologies?
Sure. And in the way of background, I've spent a little over half my career at the intersection of tech and place, and I also have worked within tech. Previously, I was VP of Digital Innovation at Herman Miller before I got back into research. And so I'll give you my perspective, but I'll acknowledge that um, I think a lot of what's being written about and talked about out there is wildly speculative, and there's a lot of hype. So here's what I see: technologies like AR and VR are not new. They're 40 or 50 years old. And there's been a lot of thought, just as there has been about working in sim environments or working in the metaverse. about what it looks like to try to operate in a fully immersive digital environment. I have yet to see any evidence that people are seeking that. And if anything, those technologies for me have become a bit more niche. So we use AR to help people see product in spaces that are, where the product isn't really there. We've used VR for years to try to help people navigate spaces that we're proposing, but generally they greatly prefer to see it on a 2D screen. We've looked into holography and the future of holographs. I know you've been active there. Um, I don't. I'm not suggesting that any of this stuff isn't possible, but I don't personally think it's poised to make a significant change in how we're working anytime soon. When it comes to AI, it's a little bit different story, and I'll get like super tactical. AI offers people the ability to reduce some of the rote, less desirable parts of their workday. I have the privilege of writing for Forbes online each month, and I'll gladly share that an LLM is my editor. Like if I write something, I'll ask it to clean up my grammar, and I'm very thankful for that little bit of coaching. So in an ideal
I've seen I've seen some of your writing. I agree.
Thank you. It's doing its job. So I think there's some changes in work when it comes to actual buildings. There's some fascinating advances in how the buildings are getting smarter and how we can use data to plan and manage the buildings better over time. But maybe one of the things that I find most intriguing, this is like just at a really tactical level, is I do see voice interface. For all the talk in the past about gestural interface, I see voice interface as something that's only going to get more common. I've talked with our former chief digital officer, who is now in another role within MillerKnoll, Ben Groom, about this. It's probably realistic that we'll be talking to our devices, not just through our devices, even more than the example you shared of talking with Siri. That has some implications to our physical working environments, et cetera. But I still think there's going to be a balance that for all of the opportunities to work in very technologically progressive ways, there will always be this need to counterbalance the effect of these things and make sure that we provide really, really good experiences for people together in the times when they want them. And so we're just seeking that balance.
Well, it's funny. We've all experienced, I guess I'll say, technology, the sort of technology that we're talking about. Talking about talking to to the technology and having it interact as opposed to typing it or doing something else. That's been around for decades.
Mm-hmm.
We've all been stuck. You and I were talking about travel a little bit earlier. Um, in the United Airlines or American Airlines voice mail from hell loop that we can't get stuff done,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's disappearing. We our own company, we're bringing in artificial intelligence receptionists to manage incoming calls in our call center, and they can do a level 1 or 2. They can't do a level 3 or 4,
Mm-hmm.
but they up to a certain level, they're faster, they're more consistent, they actually give the customer a better experience. But you do have to be able to get out and or escalate something to someone that can say, "No, what do you really need here?"
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and deal with it. And I think you're right. We will be speaking using our voice and our total brain, not just our "how do I get the grammar right" brain, in all of this.
Yeah, in more interactive relational ways, and so we do need to think about those dynamics. But I think of one of the first pilots that we did within Herman Miller around using bots. I think this was around 2016 or 17. One of my colleagues, Mark, basically proposed that we use a couple of bots to begin paying our bills in more efficient ways. As it turns out, there were two people within the organization at that time who spent about 40% of their day literally taking pieces of paper and like circling things and inputting them. And the company ran a pilot to be able to use AI to do this more effectively. It created some concerns early on around like, hey, what if the bot adds a zero? And it wasn't difficult to make the case that if somebody adds a zero, it's more likely going to be the person, not the bot. But what I loved most about that pilot is there was an agreement with the head of the department before we started that if this was successful, those employees were able to repurpose that 40% for more meaningful work that required more of a human touch. It wasn't trying to eliminate somebody's job.
Into the employee.
Yeah,
It's more interesting work for the
way
employee, and
more
I
interesting. So that's the upside of this. If we can do it right, we take out that human struggle, we reduce those sort of demands in the same way that we've seen automation in our manufacturing spaces, reducing the work that people can't stand to do the sort of work that they love. Like that's an optimistic take, but if we do that, then these work environments should only become richer and more interesting.
well, I think if you're being inventive, you always have to be optimistic, honestly. You never wanna invent something on the bad side, you always wanna invent it on the good side.
Yeah.
Give me 2 or 3 big trends that you see in the future of work over the next just only go to out the next 5 years. If we go out 30 years, if it's like, who knows? But, the next 5 years, what do you see as the big trends that are gonna impact us the most?
Well, as it pertains to work or specifically our physical workplaces.
No, pretend well, tie it all together however you like.
Sure. Um, I do think that we're in a bit of a pendulum shift where the last few years, we've seen such an explosive use of technology, and in particular, technologies to enable us to work in more distributed and remote ways, that people are seeking a little bit of a counterbalance. I'll give you one really specific example. We were co-founders of an initiative called Future Forum that for 2 years surveyed 10,000 people every quarter. We consistently found that people wanted location flexibility. I think 81% said they did, but a larger percentage, 93%, wanted more schedule flexibility. They wanted more control over their calendar. I frequently heard people complain about the sheer amount of their time spent on meetings. And I've been encouraged to see individuals and organizations getting quite purposeful about trying to eliminate this condition where people feel victim to their calendars. And so for me, that's symptomatic of a larger and positive thing that's happening, which is people are seeking a bit more of a balance between those distributed experiences, those technology enabled experiences, and richer in person experiences. I think organizations are going to continue to try to figure out what it looks like to knit together a degree of belonging. Here in the US, there's been some political backlash against DEIB initiatives, but I do see so many organizations seeking to try to create conditions where people feel like they belong, that organizational hierarchy and other things that might cause someone to feel like they're on the edge doesn't get in the way as much because the economics are pretty straightforward. We only have so much labor, and that's not just a U.S. thing. There's a global labor shortage, and so organizations are trying to find a way of promoting belonging. What's that?
Yeah, it's actually shrinking as a percentage of the population
Yeah,
globally.
exactly. So I think again, I get to see some of these examples of organizations trying to focus more on this balance of good time together in person with really great technology experiences as something that is part of the workday, but not exclusively. I mentioned it before, but distributed teams aren't going anywhere. I mean, the world is only going to continue to get more distributed. And so the organizations are going to have to spend more and more time training leaders. And it's one thing to talk about upskilling, and I wish we saw better examples of what upskilling really is. But I think as we've all experienced in our lives, most of our work life relates so directly with the abilities and temperament of our managers that organizations are spending, thankfully, more and more time looking at the effects of managers on team dynamics. I'm thinking about my friend Debbie Lovich at BCG and their work on enjoyment. They've done a bunch of great research indicating that title and money might get you in the door, but what determines whether or not you're going to stay is the degree to which you actually enjoy your work. And that's so critically dependent upon your manager and your team dynamics that when I think about future of work and I think about workplace, teams are the nucleus for me. And organizations have to invest in teams and team leadership in order to balance all of this crazy complexity that we might get into in the course of a conversation like this.
Well, I wanna stress that and the social obligation element, and, maybe this is a good or a bad thing to say, but I forget the older football coach, that made this response to a question. What do you see today versus when the 80s or the 90s? And he said, well, today I see people that are focused on privileges and entitlement and self. He said, and before we were focused on loyalty and obligation and things of that nature, much more purposeful.
Mhm.
I think in our distributed work environment, and you brought this up originally, we do have to look at our moral obligation to our teams, not just to ourselves. We cannot be freelancers and be a part of anything except the proverbial lone wolf, and it never ends well. We as a society, we as a species, have always done best by working together and by coming together and using our communal strength. And I hope that's where all of these changes end up as we create solutions.
I think so, and I think we should also acknowledge that. And I don't believe that the popularized generational frameworks are very useful in this sense. But if you do look across age and demographics, there is a growing desire for a lot of people to work for an organization whose intent, even within the context of the business world, is good, that they're trying to do something good in the world, that they have some degree of purpose or mission. And that's tough when you work for a 300-person adhesives company. And so sometimes it's about being good to the earth, but a lot of times it's about being good to the employees. And this desire among employees to work for an organization that takes the health of their community seriously isn't, for me, just like some sort of theoretical aspirational thing. It ties directly to whether or not organizations are able to retain good employees that are so critical to their productivity. And so all of this conversation about relationships, about team dynamics, about people finding a degree of emotional connection with the places they work, if it's all in the service of an organization saying we're taking care of our employees so that those employees can achieve more together and outperform the market, I think that's where success lies. And those organizations that continue to operate out of a sense of mistrust or convey to their employees that it isn't like they're not really on equal footing to the organization's stockholders or customers are missing the mark. Like employees are the critical foundation for all this, and their well-being and their sense of community is what's going to ultimately drive results.
No, I could not agree with you more. I absolutely agree with that. Hey, Ryan, thank you so much for your time today. It's really appreciated. You've been a wonderful guest and provided a tremendous insight. And I want to wish you a exciting and new future of work in 2025 as we start the year off. And we'll look forward to the next time.
This was a great way to start the year, and as always, I appreciate joining you, my friend.
Thank you.
If it's impacting the future of work, it's in the Future of Work podcast by allwork.space.